Dream, search, drive. Cars.co.za.
And whether you're an angel, a dictator, a space captain, a tree, or just if your car is stolen, we'll help you replace it.
Oh, it's still Archie's car, man.
With no drama. Budget, the official insurer of good South Africans.
Hello and welcome back to the Cars.co.za YouTube channel. My name is Ciro De Siena, and now we try be a helpful bunch here around Cars.co.za, and we wanted to create this video to be as helpful as possible to you. The price of diesel in South Africa is around 25 Rand per litre. This means for your crisp 100 Rand note, you're only getting 4 litres of fuel. It's so painful, and it's probably only going to get worse. Every South African right now is feeling the pain at the pumps, and so we thought it was the right time to make a video like this to help you maximize the fuel you're buying no matter which car you drive. Now, before we get to the practical advice, let's begin with some science. I promise this is going to be more interesting than when you were in grade 8 learning about physics and falling asleep at the back of the class. I want to introduce you to the concept of bigger bangs. Very briefly, the way your car's engine works, whether it's petrol or diesel, is by injecting petrol and air into a cylinder. In the case of the petrol motor, the spark plug ignites the mixture, creating an explosion which sends the piston downwards, and this happens in a cycle which rotates the crankshaft, which turns the gears in your gearbox, which eventually turns your wheels, and then you go forwards or backwards. Importantly, to create this explosion, the amount of fuel injected changes depending on various factors. Put simply, your fuel consumption is not entirely determined by the speed you are traveling, the gear you are in, or the speed of the engine, which is displayed as RPM on your rev counter. It actually is mostly to do with a concept called load, or how much work your engine is doing at any given time. The most important aspect to understand here is that your engine does not use a set amount of fuel at any given time. When you increase throttle input by pressing on the accelerator pedal, the engine is shoving more air into the cylinders and at the same time increasing the amount of fuel injected into the cylinders. This happens when the load on the engine increases. Load can be understood as the amount of energy your engine needs to create to overcome a certain situation. So imagine, for instance, you are driving along at 60 kilometers an hour and you start going up a hill. If you want to maintain that speed, your engine will need to work harder to push the car up the hill. This is when your fuel consumption increases. But most importantly, your engine is working hardest when you are accelerating as opposed to slowing down or maintaining a constant speed. Your engine also works harder when you add weight to your car. If you are alone in your car, the engine will use a certain amount of fuel. For every person you add or luggage you add, for instance, this extra weight means extra work for the engine, which increases fuel consumption. But let's concentrate on acceleration. Now you may ask, how do you avoid accelerating because you'll never go anywhere? Well, the concept is known as driving without brakes, which essentially means avoiding slowing down so that you don't have to speed up again. What you want to aim for is maintaining your momentum as much as possible. Once you are up to speed, maintaining that speed is when your engine is running most efficiently. So you want to do everything you can to maintain your speed. The way to do this is by constantly anticipating what the traffic is doing, so you don't have to slow down unnecessarily, and also trying to game the traffic lights so you don't have to stop completely. Moving your vehicle from a standstill back up to speed is what uses the most amount of fuel per kilometer, because your engine needs bigger bangs to create more power. So if you can avoid that, you'll dramatically reduce your fuel consumption. While highway driving, you want to keep your throttle inputs as constant as possible, sticking as close as possible to one speed. Your car's cruise control is very good at doing this, and it's a good idea to get used to using cruise control if you have it in your car. Now, while maintaining speed is a great rule of thumb, one more technique that really works is to increase your speed a little bit going downhill and slow down slightly or ease off the throttle when traveling uphill. Any uphill is always going to increase fuel consumption, so you can mitigate that by easing off the throttle. Of course, if you are on a highway and you want to slow down a little, make sure you keep to the middle or left lane to avoid holding up traffic in the fast lane. Now, in the rest of this video, we're going to provide a variety of tips and tricks to reduce your fuel consumption. But the reality is that changing the way you drive is the most effective way of saving fuel. In fact, some studies show that driving in this way can reduce your fuel consumption by up to 33%. That means for every 1,000 Rand of fuel you buy, you'll potentially save over 300 Rand. I can't stress this enough. If you constantly think about those bigger bangs and teach yourself to drive in the way I've described, you will see the best fuel consumption figures you've ever seen in your car. Now let's start off with some myth busting. Coasting downhill in neutral will not save you fuel. The reason for this is when you coast in neutral, your engine returns to idle, which uses a certain amount of fuel dependent on such factors as the size of your engine. When you coast in gear, your engine uses the rotation of the wheels to keep the engine turning, and while it's doing this, it injects absolutely no fuel into the cylinders at all. So if you are rolling downhill, be sure to put the car in 6th or 5th gear, depending on the speed you want to maintain. If you drive an automatic, the car will do this for you. It will sound like the engine is straining, but that's because of a concept called engine braking, which isn't too important in this conversation. And even though your revs will actually climb as you roll downhill in gear, you will not be using any fuel. Now let's chat about your air conditioning. Here's another myth or misconception, and it concerns driving with your windows open versus using the aircon. The simplest explanation here is that below about 60 kilometers an hour, it is more fuel efficient to switch off your aircon and drive with the windows open. Above that speed, and especially at highway speed, it is better to use the air conditioning. This is because having the windows open at high speed increases the aerodynamic drag on the car, which means your engine has to work harder to push the car through the air. Now, if you can do me a favor, please show this video to your Uber driver. Ultimately though, your aircon will always consume some fuel, and the less you use it, the better. I know we live in a hot country, so this is difficult, but it is something to keep in mind. Now the next issue is short distances. Traveling very short distances when you start the car, drive for under 5 kilometers and turn the car off again has a negative effect on fuel consumption. This is because your engine runs optimally at a certain temperature, and a very short trip will not allow the engine to get up to temperature. That being said, more modern cars, say under 10 years old, barely require to be warmed up, and they are very good at managing their operating temperature. However, with older cars, it is a good idea to let the engine warm up on startup before setting off. This will ensure your engine gets to optimal operating temperature and uses less fuel for the duration of your drive. It also has the added benefit of oiling up the engine properly, which will extend the life of your motor. Now this sounds incredibly obvious, but speeding increases fuel consumption. Most cars are engineered and geared to run optimally at 120 kilometers an hour. Any speed above this will start to increase consumption exponentially. And of course, if you get a speeding fine, all of your hard work in saving fuel will have been a waste of time. Now this is something I like to do. It is not a bad idea at all to keep a notebook in your cubbyhole and make notes every time you fill up. What you want to do is reset the trip counter when you put fuel in the car. Make a note of the date, the number of liters filled, and the cost in rands. Then when you next head to the fuel station, take the readout from your trip counter and fill it in on the previous entry. It's not a bad idea to make a little note on that entry, particularly if you did something out of the ordinary, such as a long distance highway trip. There are also free smartphone apps which can do this, but personally I like keeping a physical logbook. Over time, you will build up a nice record of your fuel spend, and it's always a nice feeling to see how much you've saved. If you have an older car and you would like to work out what your consumption is in terms of liters per 100 kilometers, here is the method of working that out. Head to the fuel station and fill up your tank to 1 click and then reset your trip counter. Try drive exactly 100 kilometers and return to a fuel station. Fill up the car again to 1 click and take note of how many liters you needed to do so. This will give you your liters per 100 kilometer figure. Now in this final section of the video, we are going to look at some maintenance tips and tricks. Let's look at ways to maintain your car to help with overall fuel consumption. According to some studies, using a high quality oil can improve fuel consumption by up to 12%. With modern cars, it is best to follow the advice in the owner's manual and stick to the prescribed oil grade. But with older cars, switching to a high quality, fully synthetic oil can save you money, and you will almost certainly offset the higher price of the oil. If you are uncertain about choosing an oil, a good idea is to phone a franchise dealer of your car brand and ask to speak to the service manager. They are usually happy to advise you on the latest recommendation for your car. Sometimes the manufacturer will change the recommended oil grade for your vehicle over time, so it is important to keep up to date with this information. A specialized oil retailer will also be able to advise you. It is a good idea, especially on older cars, to change oil regularly. This is not an expensive job and is worth it, especially in terms of extending the life of your engine. A regular oil change every 10,000 to 15,000 kilometers is generally recommended to keep your engine happy. And remember, a happy engine works optimally and is most efficient. Now the next tip is around spark plugs. Spark plugs are relatively cheap service parts for your car, and it is worth spending on a very good brand. You don't need to change spark plugs as often as you change oil, but if you notice that your engine is behaving strangely, such as a rough idle or a lumpy startup, this is generally a sign to change your plugs. Spark plugs that are in tip-top shape will contribute to your engine working optimally and will keep your fuel consumption in check. Now, when it comes to diesel engines, over time the injectors may become clogged up, especially because we generally have substandard fuel quality in South Africa. Roughly every 30,000 kilometers, it is worth having your injectors tested to make sure they are in good working order. Faulty or dirty diesel injectors can have a significant impact on fuel usage, so it is worth spending a bit of money on this kind of maintenance. And lastly, tire pressure. This is a really easy win. Make sure your tires are inflated properly. The reason for this is that if your tires are under pressure, it will increase the friction on the road, creating more work for the engine to do. You will find the recommended tire pressures on the driver's door sill of your vehicle, and we recommend checking your pressures once a month. A hugely important factor when it comes to tire pressures is to change the pressure to suit the load you are carrying. If you are going on a road trip and your car is full of people and their things, you absolutely have to increase the tire pressures, especially at the rear. There will be more information on this in your owner's manual, but a quick guide is on the door sill. If you are still uncertain, the petrol attendant should be able to help you. Personally, I would recommend trying to find a fuel station that has digital air pressure hoses. The old-fashioned analog hose reading thingy needs to be calibrated often, which to my understanding hardly ever happens, and so they tend to be inaccurate. More and more fuel stations are investing in digital air pumps, and so it shouldn't be too hard to find one. And so we come to the end of our fuel saving journey. We really hope you found this video helpful, and we would love it if you shared it with your colleagues, your friends, and your family to also help them save fuel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments below. Let us know if you have tried any of these techniques and if they worked for you. And we'd love to hear if you have any more tips and tricks to share with our community. We'd also love it if you subscribe to our channel and join us on our YouTube adventures. Thanks very much for watching. My name is Ciro De Siena, and I'll see you on the next one. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Cars.co.za.
Are you busy trying to decide between 2 cars, 3 cars, 4 cars, 5 cars, 6 cars? We have an excellent compare tool on our site which will help you make sense of all the different pricing and all the different specs. You'll find it on our main site as well as in our app. It's super slick, it's easy to use, it's highly detailed, it's constantly updated with the latest information and pricing, and I can guarantee you it'll make your life a ton easier. Check it out on our website, link in the description below.
A lifetime guarantee on all repairs is a lifetime of sidestepping, tackling, and modeling your speedos happily. Budget, the official insurer of good South Africans.